8. The European Union is expected to impose tougher sanctions on Russia today because of the crisis in Ukraine. These might include an arms embargo, limits on the sale of energy technology, restrictions on Russian state banks and their access to European financial markets. We'll be talking to Jonathan Davis in a moment, but first let's hear from Foreign Minister Philip Hammond, who says Russia must stop supporting Ukrainian separatists.
We will continue to make clear to the Russians that if they continue to supply weapons, continue to supply support, continue to supply training to the separatists in eastern Ukraine, there will be further costs that they will incur, further damage to the Russian economy through sanctions that we will apply in response to such aggressive behaviour.
There's been a stiffening of resolve in Europe following the shooting down of the Malaysia Airlines plane nearly 2 weeks ago. Pro-Russian separatists blamed for shooting it down with a missile. The United States says it will impose similar measures as it's seen no evidence President Putin is prepared to change his policy in eastern Ukraine. President Obama's national security advisor is Tony Blinken.
The longer this goes on, there's the risk of further outrageous actions by the separatists or by Russia that deepen the international crisis. So there is a need to take further action now to convince Russia to change course and cease its efforts to destabilise Ukraine.
David Cameron is due to meet the British families of the people killed in the crash of the Malaysian Airlines flight. Barry Sweeney's son Liam was one of 10 British passengers who died. He was on his way to New Zealand to watch Newcastle United play. Mr. Sweeney says his priority is to see his son's body come home.
We've just got to hope that everybody comes home. I do believe that there are still some missing. And I won't even say I hope Liam's not one of them, because obviously I do, but everybody needs closure on this.
And the Prime Minister is expected to offer his condolences to the families, as well as discussing the international response to the plane crash. And I was saying that response could include sanctions if EU leaders can agree some plan of action today. Let's talk to Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and wealth manager. There's a feeling abroad that something must be done, Jonathan. It's just a question of how effective something like economic sanctions would be. What are your thoughts on that?
I would suggest at the level we're talking, they're totally ineffective. I think it's politicians across the EU, including David Cameron, as you suggest, just pretending that they're actually doing something. All it does, actually, is hurt businesses. And let's face it, we're talking about nuclear powers here, ultimately. So, I can't imagine that this is going to escalate much further, and indeed, I would suggest that it's probably pretty temporary. I think it's all pretty political to pretend to the people that they're actually doing something. I don't think they actually are. The businesses, however, involved are going to be hit, and that is unconscionable as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, is Mr. Putin amenable to any other approach? We talked to a Russian expert earlier, and they say that this sort of attempt at playing hardball by the West could drive Russia further into its shell. And yet we feel we can't let Putin carry on the way he's carrying on.
Yes, well, it'd be very interesting to hear who's actually using those words. Look, I'm no Russia sympathizer, I can assure you of that. I'm an economist, as you say. But, if we're talking about that disgraceful act of shooting down the Malaysian aircraft, it's not actually been proven in international circles that Russia had anything to do with it. So, they're bringing on these sanctions, which, okay, it's not going to be a massive problem, of course, for the UK or indeed the Northern Ireland economy, but individual businesses and individuals working in those businesses are going to be directly affected by politicians pretending that they're doing something about what? We don't even know what they're doing. They don't even know about what they're doing anything. Because we don't, as I say, no one's actually related the shooting down to Russia. So what is it even all about?
Yes, well, it can't be proved beyond doubt. I'm with you there. But, I mean, the latest report, the plane was brought down by shrapnel. Russians are supplying the separatists with heavy-duty hardware, including Buck missiles. So it's quite likely they brought it down, in which case the West feels that this is irresponsible on the part of Russia and President Putin and feels something should be done about it. I mean, that's a very reasonable response.
Well, that's one opinion for sure. Looking at the economics, Northern Ireland businesses, okay, it's a very tiny proportion of Northern Ireland economy exporting to Russia. It's less than 0.5% from the numbers that I've seen. Particularly affected, I think, though, will be machinery and transport equipment manufacturers, which actually account for nearly 3/4 of all Northern Ireland exports to Russia at about 50 or 60 million pounds a year. So, I don't know the individuals involved in those businesses, but I'll tell you what, this could affect the work that they do. Across the UK, about 1% of international trade from the UK is linked to Russia, so clearly not a massive effect to the UK economy. This is an EU-wide issue. It's the EU politicians who are basically driving this forward, and you know what? With my cynical hat on, I know that banking is going to be severely affected by this, and I can't help thinking that there's some spooky people in Brussels who are actually using this as a means to get at the City of London to bring forward the Paris Bourse and Frankfurt. As I say, that's just me perhaps talking from left field there.
Well,
but it does look suspiciously that they're particularly getting at the City of London.
Well, there are a lot of Russian billionaires in London, that's for sure. The other thing is, of course, Jonathan, that if you get into a trade war with Russia, it cuts both ways. I mean, it's not strictly true of UK, but certainly Germany and Italy, for instance, very dependent on Russia for oil and gas.
Yes, and of course, isn't it interesting how this has been excluded from these sanctions? In other words, we must pretend that we're doing something, but we'll not actually do anything which is actually important, which is the biggest industry in Russia, because after all, we need to heat our homes and factories. No, the three areas that are being affected here are banking, defence and energy, but not energy in the sense we're talking about. We're talking about investments in energy companies in Russia, which hits BP, which has got big involvement in Russia, and it particularly affects London city firms, because no Russian firms will be allowed to list on the London stock exchanges going forward. So, it seems to me shenanigans here. It's not going to be major, these particular sanctions, no doubt. I don't think it will escalate, but, what do I know? But if it does escalate, then certainly we could get some serious financial consequences to both sides. At the moment, it's going to be some businesses and some people are affected, but it's not going to affect the wider economy.
Jonathan.